Welcome to Spinning Back Clique Reach Week here at MMA Junkie. We take a quick spin through the biggest headlines in the sport. This week, guys, we've got Mike Bond, we've got Danny Segura, we've got Goals Garcia from MMA Junkie Radio, and we got a lot to talk about. Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Francis Ngannou, Jon Jones, Bellator's back in action. We got one championship. We got a lot, so let's just get to it, okay? And with all the big fights, of course, that are on the MMA schedule, the biggest name that always stands out is Conor McGregor, right? And we know for a fact that he will be facing Dustin Poirier in a trilogy fight. Now, listen, the first time around, guys, with this rematch, it was like 6.5 years between them. So we're talking about growth and change and who's different, who's evolved. Now we're talking about 6 months. So can Conor McGregor really catch up to Dustin Poirier or change anything significantly from the first time around that we saw just earlier this year? Or should we expect to see the same result that we saw in that January rematch? Let's start with Mike Bond. Let's put 2 minutes on the clock. Have at it.
Well, John, you and I were in Abu Dhabi in January for the second fight, and I think a lot of the conversation there was if the fight goes long, if it goes to the ground, Dustin Poirier has huge advantage. If it ends early, it's going to be Conor McGregor. And I think that's largely true again for the trilogy fight, but now we know Dustin Poirier can knock out Conor McGregor in the early rounds as well. So Conor's going to have a lot of uphill challenges here to win this fight. I think, honestly, for him, with the confidence Poirier will now have after winning like that, on top of the confidence he already had just from the wins he's had in recent years, this is going to be a really tall task. If Conor wins this fight, I think it would be probably the most impressive win in his career. We know with Khabib gone, Poirier is ranked #1 in the lightweight division. So if Conor can make these adjustments, I think it would be a really big sign for him and a positive sign, but it's going to be really, really hard because this is a quick turnaround after taking a tough knockout, and Dustin's going to have all the confidence here. So it would be a really big accomplishment for Conor, but I just think it's going to be really tough for him to execute. What about you, Danny?
Yeah, I actually disagree a little bit. I think the confidence topics that you mentioned, I think they're very valid. But I think here, like, Conor McGregor won the first round. It wasn't like he got outclassed. Now, if you get outclassed and then you're fighting the same guy just 6 months later, that's usually not good news. But in this case, the leg kicks were such a big, important part. We know that Conor McGregor is a obsessed man when it comes to MMA. I'm sure he's going to do all his homework, dive in, and fix that sort of leg issue when it comes down to the fight. So I'm sure he's going to be a lot more prepared as far as that. So I think it'll extend maybe his life in that fight. I do think that Dustin Poirier has more tools. I think he's the better fighter. I favor him to win. But rather than maybe an early stoppage, I think that Conor McGregor can maybe remain dangerous in the first two. And if it gets past the second, that's when we'll see Dustin Poirier's durability and experience and also just toughness and skill take over. So I think Conor McGregor has a better chance in this fight, but I still favor Dustin Poirier.
Interesting stuff. Well, you guys are painting it out to be quite the uphill task that it is. So let's go lightning around on this. I want to bring it back around. If Conor McGregor can make the adjustments, he does find a way to win this trilogy fight. Will he then face the winner of Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira for the undisputed lightweight title? Will it just take one win for Conor McGregor to get back to a lightweight title shot? Let's just put 90 seconds on the clock. Make this one a quick one. Goals, will start with you.
Dude, guys, 100%. I mean, come on. The only thing standing in the way of that not happening would be, of course, retirement can always happen, and maybe boxing. You see Oscar De La Hoya asking for a big MMA name. We know Dana White don't like Oscar De La Hoya, but I don't know that Conor could get that job done. There are a lot of things that could possibly happen, but this is absolutely their idea, and I absolutely love it. I think it's great.
Man, I think that'll probably be the case. I mean, don't tell Justin Gaethje this. I'm sure he'll be very upset seeing that this could potentially play out this way. But I think UFC, seeing now that Conor is probably invested in fighting often, he's making a relatively short turnaround in comparison to his other turnarounds with this fight. So if he can beat Dustin, who, again, as I said previously, is right now the #1 ranked, he would have an extremely valid case for the title shot there. So I do think that's what will end up happening here. And we've seen Michael Chandler talking about Conor McGregor a lot now. If he wins this fight, I think that's something the UFC could sell and would be really appealing to kind of a mainstream audience.
Man, I have no idea. I mean, think about it. Nate Diaz is fighting. If he wins, what happens then? Masvidal is also fighting. If he loses and he's 0-2 against the champion, what is he going to do now? Climb the ladder again? No, probably super fights. And also, boxing as well. You guys mentioned, I think there's so many options. It's hard to tell what's going to be next for Conor McGregor. I do agree most likely he'll fight for the title if he does win. But even then, I'm not confident in picking anything because, like I said, there's so many options for him.
if it's Conor McGregor and Oscar De La Hoya, I quit. I'm just telling you that right now, man. I'm done. All right, listen. All right, guys. Another big fight that's on the table right now, at least as an option, is Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones. Now, it's clear that the stakes this fight are massive, but it's also clear that money seems to be the sticking point, right? We gotta get Jon Jones paid. So a lot of options on the table here where this happens or not. But let me ask you, who needs this fight to happen the most? Who needs this thing to happen? Is it Jon Jones? Is it Francis Ngannou? Is it the UFC? Who's it most important for? Let's put 2 minutes on the clock. Let's go to Ghost.
Listen, guys, I think Jon Jones absolutely needs this to happen. He's already committed to heavyweight. He's already put that weight on his body. He's not going to go back. And he didn't do that to just face contenders in the heavyweight division. He did that for a belt. He wants to cement his legacy. The UFC, they could book Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis today. We would all be pissed for about 24 hours. And guess what? We'd probably get over it because we know that first fight wasn't a true representation of what that fight should actually look like. We know it's going to be a banger. The UFC's holding all the cards right now. Jon Jones has always needed a good dance partner. So if there's not going to be heat, there needs to be a belt on the line. You can't just throw Jon Jones up against anyone. UFC holds all the cards. Jon Jones needs this to happen.
I'm going to say Francis Ngannou actually needs to happen the most. I don't know if it necessarily needs to happen for him next, but if he really wants to entrench himself as, that elite heavyweight champion, a guy that crosses over into the mainstream, has all these appealing aspects that I think we see in him, that fight would be so good for him. I mean, Jon Jones's legacy is set. If he never fights again, we know he's already one of the greatest fighters of all time. He's the best light heavyweight of all time. This heavyweight move is just kind of icing on the cake for his legacy, and it doesn't seem like he's going to compromise himself by taking a lower payday than he feels he should get to take this fight. So for him, if it never happens, so be it. For Francis Ngannou, I think this would be so much bigger for him, because if he can go out there and he can knock out Jon Jones, that just catapults him into the stratosphere, and that would just be so big for him. So I think for the biggest upside in terms of this fight is for Francis.
You know who needs to watch that? Who needs that fight? I need to watch that shit. That fight is amazing. You kill me? Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. The UFC doesn't need it as much. None of those players. I need that fight. That fight's amazing. It's a treat for the fans. But after that, I agree with everything that Mike said. I mean, the UFC is going to make money regardless. Jon Jones' legacy set regardless. Really, the person who has the most to gain here is Francis Ngannou for all the reasons that Mike Bong said.
Can't even be mad at you right there for going a few seconds over, because the people need this fight. Damn it, I want to see that fight. You're absolutely right, Danny Segura. All right, listen, here's a fight booking that really, I'll be honest, took me by surprise. I think it took a lot of us by surprise, for being honest. But Leon Edwards versus Nate Diaz at UFC 262. Now, we're going to be breaking this down for weeks to come, no question about it. So just give me your initial impression of the fight. When you heard it, love it or you hate it? Let's make it snappy. Let's just put 90 seconds on the clock. Goes, let's start with you.
I was a little surprised, guys, but guess what? When the smoke cleared, I love it. Anytime you can get a Diaz brother back in action, it's a good thing. But we didn't really think that name, Leon Edwards, was the name that was going to drag out Nate Diaz out of the semi-retirement where he goes away. It's a fresh matchup. I like it. And you look at both fighting styles. Neither guy backs off. Who's going to put the pressure in this fight? I think it's a good one. And if you look at it from the UFC's perspective, if Nate Diaz wins, then guess what? You could set up a lot of fights, right? But if Leon Edwards wins, well, this is a fight that's probably going to put him over a little bit with the general public, with the world. I like the matchup. In fact, I love it. What do you think, Danny?
Well, I was super surprised, to steal a line for Nate Diaz and turn around. I was extremely surprised, motherfuckers. I mean, that fight came out of nowhere. Diaz fighting Edwards, but it actually makes sense. Leon Edwards needs a big name. Leon Edwards, we know that he's very skilled, but he just hasn't crossed and made a name for himself. So what a better opponent than against Nate Diaz? And Nate Diaz is completely the opposite. His hate is he's just a big name. He's not a skilled fighter. He's a 50-50 fighter, right? But now he's fighting the guy that nobody wanted to fight, So I think it works out. I think this is a fantastic bout that really serves both fighters. So I love it. Completely taken away by it. Surprised. Whatever word you want to put in there, but I'm all in, and I think it's going to be a great fight.
Yeah, I love it. I know we're short on time here, but for Leon Edwards, if he's not getting a title shot, this is absolutely the next best thing. You can take his name to the next level, and if you're Nate Diaz, coming back, you win this fight, you could very well make a case for a title shot. So I think it's great for both guys.
It's crazy. Not often are we so surprised by something, but I do like it. It was a weird one I didn't see coming, but I do dig it, guys. All right, let's talk about Bellator. They're back in action after a lengthy delay, right? And We now know the fight that I think we all wanted to see. Patrcio, Pitbull, and AJ McKee is going to come up later this year. $1 million will be on the line. The Bellator title will be on the line. So here's a question I have for you. Pitbull, he's a 2-belt holder, right? Currently number 4 in the latest USA Today Sports MMA Junkie rankings. McKee, he's undefeated and he's number 5. Does the winner of this fight deserve to be called the best featherweight in the world? Let's put 2 minutes on the clock. Let's get it started.
Guys, if it's Pitbull, I would say yes. If it's AJ, I would say no. Part of being the best in the world isn't just beating the best. It's defending your title, holding on to that, having those title defenses. That's what separates you. That's what makes people say this guy is the best. When you look at Alexander Volkanovski, I think we still have some questions there. We still have things that he needs to prove as a featherweight over there in the UFC. Pitbull has done it all, man. He's on a good streak. AJ McKee, if he wins that fight, yeah, it would be a great skin on his wall, but we need to see more from the kid. We need to see how he handles the pressure of being a champion. So I think if it's Pitbull, I'm going to say yes.
It's a tough one. I'm not going to say quite yet that they're there. I mean, you look at some of the resumes of like Max Holloway, of Alexander Volkanovski. Volkanovski's last 3 names that he's beat have been Chad Mendes, Jose Aldo, and then Max Holloway twice. Whatever you think about those decisions or the results of those fights, those are 3 of the greatest featherweights of all time. And Patrcio Pitbull, amazing. He just doesn't have that caliber of a resume. Of course, the Michael Chandler win is great, and especially if Michael Chandler becomes the UFC champion, that would be phenomenal for his credibility and everything. But I just think these guys in the UFC, their featherweight resumes are just a little notch above in terms of the consistency of opponent level that they've been fighting. So Patrcio Pitbull, phenomenal fighter. AJ McKee, phenomenal fighter. But I don't mean to be like the UFC homer here, but the level of competition consistently they face in the UFC is just takes them slightly above, in my opinion.
Yeah, just real quick here. I agree with Mike. I think, as long as you have UFC next to champion, right, usually that's going to be the guy that you look at for the best at 145 pounds. But I do think there's a slight chance that this might change. I mean, let's not forget, the only relevant loss that Michael Chandler has is to Patrcio Pitbull. If he goes out there and looks amazing and becomes champion, if Ortega and Volkanovski have a so-so fight, all of a sudden, the most dominant figure at 145 pounds is the man who has 2 belts and a win over the current UFC lightweight champion. So I think there's a slight chance, if all things play out, that we could be calling Pitbull the greatest featherweight in a few months here.
It's cool that it's at least a discussion point, right? It's been a long time, I think, since we've had somebody that was that deserving of being in that discussion. So great to see what Bellator's been able to build there. All right, guys, let's move on to our last topic here. One Championship. It's going to air for the first time live in prime time in the U.S., which could be a big moment for them. It's going to get exposure, I'm sure, to fans they haven't had before. It's one on TNT1. And look at the lineup. You got our number 1 flyweight, Demetrious Johnson, challenging for the title over there. The Underground King is back, Eddie Alvarez. You got Thai boxer Rod Tang in 4-ounce gloves. If you've ever seen that dude, it's absolute insanity. Put him in small gloves, it's going to be crazy. And you got Rug, the viral sensation. He's in action as well, all in this one card. So for a lot of people that maybe haven't seen one championship before, if there was one fight that you were telling them that they need to tune in and not miss, which one would it be? Well, let's put 2 minutes on the clock, and we'll start with goals.
I think if there's one fight that if you want to see something different than Rod Tang, I mean, when do you ever get to see these guys put on those gloves? But come on, we're MMA junkie. We love MMA. You got to see the GOAT, Demetrious Johnson. Fighters are the ones that always come on our show and they tell us, we think Demetrious Johnson is the GOAT. He has a very tough task ahead of him. And his road over there at one championship hasn't been the easiest. He's been tested. Demetrious Johnson is trying to add to his legacy here. If you watch any of his past fights, look at the way they end. KO, submission, anything can happen. Early, late, you cannot miss when Demetrious Johnson fights.
Yeah, I think you're on point there, Goes. I mean, just to be slightly different, I'll say Eddie Alvarez, just because this guy, still in my money, one of the greatest action fighters all time in MMA history. He has done so many amazing things, Bellator champ, UFC champ. We know all his accolades. And anytime Eddie gets in there, whether it's him getting dropped early and having to rally his way back, or just going out there and giving us a spectacular one-sided performance, he's always a treat to watch. I think maybe his leash in terms of his longevity in the sport is maybe a little bit shorter than Demetrious Johnson at this point. So I think we need to relish every opportunity we get to watch Eddie Alvarez fight at this point.
Yeah, I can get all hipster with you and go down the card, but really the only title fight here in this card is the one that Demetrious Johnson is in. And look, Adriano Moraes is an excellent talent. He trains out of American Top Team. I believe he's 18-3. He has some solid wins over his resume, 12 finishes. So he's a very, very solid opponent. And let's not forget, and this is why I love the MMA Junkie rankings, it's crazy that Demetrious Johnson, he's done so much, yet he's still very, very underrated. I think he's the best flyweight on the planet, even at 34 years of age. He hasn't lost since he left the UFC, and he left the UFC in a loss, but it's a very, very close split decision to Henry Cejudo, who's also a great fighter and somewhat underrated. So maybe not by him, but by the public. I would say that, yeah, the Demetrious Johnson fight is against Adriano Moraes. That's the most important fight there, and that's the one that I'm looking forward to because DJ, a historical talent, and I'm always looking forward to watching him compete.
Yeah, cool to see Mighty Mouse getting that love from all you guys. He's truly one of the greatest of all time. It's great to see him back in action. But I'll be honest with you, I'm going to watch Rod Tang, man. And the Muay Thai and the 4-ounce gloves, it sold me, man. I don't know if you guys have seen it before, but if any fans haven't seen it, it's a different ball game, man. You're going to see some knockouts. So I'm looking
John's
forward to that.
the MMA hipster here.
I'm the MMA hipster. I'm looking forward to that one. I won on TNT1. All right, guys, it's a busy week. UFC, Bellator, One Championship, they're all in action. Man, PFL kicks off later this month. This whole month is going to be insane. So keep an eye out for all of it. Of course, we'll talk about it each week here